My name is Jack Zedlitz. I am the Director of Professional Development for the Ronnie K. Irani Center for Energy Solutions, which is within Mewburn College of Earth and Energy at the University of Oklahoma. This webcast is one of a series that we are doing to support the marketing for our Energy ESG Leadership Certificate Program, which kicks off later in October. If you'd like more if you'd like more information about that, you can click on the QR code in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. I've got David Ferris with me today. David is an instructor in the Energy ESG Leadership Program. He is also the Chief Sustainability Officer for Vital Energy. He has more than 20 years of experience in upstream oil and natural gas, and has held leadership, strategy, and technical roles for Devon Energy, Anadarko Petroleum, Crawley Petroleum. David is an OU alum and earned a Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Engineering, Master of Business Administration, and a Master of Science in Natural Gas Engineering and Management. And later on in his career, went back and got a doctorate in organizational change and leadership from the University of Southern California, and that's the only time I will ever reference that university. He serves as the director of the OERB, the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma, the Texas Oil and Gas Association, and the Industry Advisory Board for the Mewburn School of Petroleum and Geological Engineering at OU. So, David, it is wonderful to speak with you again. Thank you for your support of the Energy ESG Leadership Program, as well as your time today for this conversation.
No, thanks, Jack. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Appreciate all that the Center for Energy Solutions is doing to really improve both practical experience and professional development for students and industry alike across a variety of topics. So, team's doing great work, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. We're happy to have you. So we are, our vision is greater opportunity for all through reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy. And I think my first question for you really is a reaction to some information I learned recently from Arjun Murthy at Veritan. He presented a strong case for very robust global crude oil demand, in contrast with what the International Energy Agency had put out in 2019. Their supposition, their forecast was that crude oil demand had peaked at that point, was at or very near a peak. Arjun points out that there's about 1 billion people in the United States, Western Europe, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. Those billion people consume about 13 to 14 barrels of oil per capita per year. The other 7 billion people on Earth, so 7/8 of the world population, they consume about 3 barrels of oil per capita per year. And they are on a very understandable march towards improvement for their livelihood. So the writing is on the wall for this robust global demand growth well into the future. And I guess I've got 2 questions from that, which is, how can we as industry participants, how can we meet global demand but do so sustainably if we're looking at a ramp in demand that's potentially unprecedented in the next 2 to 3 decades? And then, is ESG compatible with robust global crude oil consumption growth?
Yeah, two really good questions, Jack, and I love the reference to our friends at Veritan, Maynard and Jeff and Arjun and Mike and team do just such a great job there, and really appreciate what they do for the industry. If you're not familiar with Veritan, go check it out. The Close of Business Tuesday podcast is such a good look at kind of energy from all angles and all sides, and really helps us have smarter conversations about the future of energy. And I think Maynard's been a good friend to the center and hosted, hosted COBT from the center a couple of years ago, and was a recent speaker at the cohort 3, I think it was, for the energy certificate. So appreciate the reference to Veriton. And here at Vital, we appreciate the work that Veriton's doing as well. And so I'd like to turn your 3 questions, Jack, 2 questions into 3. And one of them is kind of implied, but I think it's worth calling out. And I think it's the reason you mentioned this. And that question is, do people who have less energy today deserve the opportunity to have more energy in the future? And my answer to that question is yes. I think, without question, as part of our at Vital, that's why we kind of rebranded the company and thought about things differently. Our purpose as a company is we exist to energize human potential, and part of that is producing the energy that we all use every day that powers us, traveling the world to this webcast. And so I think that's an understood question that was answered by you asking it, Jack, but wanted to just call that out, that we do think that the people around the world deserve the opportunity to have safe, affordable, reliable, secure access to energy, and the world's going to continue to need energy. I think we can meet that global demand. I think it's going to take a portfolio of sources. I'm a efficient portfolio guy when it comes to stocks or clothes or energy. I think we're going to need a variety of sources. Some places are going to have more of certain items versus other areas, but that's why we need to think about kind of energy on a global basis. The U.S. has shown what we can do when really using natural gas to displace some older, less efficient coal plants, and that really accelerated the reductions in carbon intensity of the energy grid, energy supply here in the U.S., along with additional advances in renewables. I think similar trends can take place around the world. I think our friends at Veriton would also be quick to point out that energy security in today's world is very important. And when you've got local sources of coal in China and India, it's going to be very hard to move away from those. So how do we think about helping provide technology that, yes, clean burning coal, modern facilities is better than older, less efficient coal facilities. Natural gas is better than those clean burning coals. So how do we help ourselves through technology, carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and other means, efficiency technology, be more efficient in the future with respect to our energy production and utilization of that energy. So I think we can meet global energy. I think it's going to take all forms. I would say that even in the net zero scenario, 20% roughly of world energy is still oil and natural gas. So that, I think that kind of answers your third question: is ESG compatible with global oil consumption growth? And I would say yes. We're still going to be using oil even in 2050, even in a net zero scenario. We just think that oil should be low cost, low carbon. I believe that there are a lot of countries that are focused on this. I think we're going to hear a lot more about methane reductions coming out of COP28 in the Middle East later on this year. You've seen the U.S. Is among major energy producers, has some of the lowest flaring intensity out of all of those as a proxy for emissions, and the U.S. has reduced flaring intensity more than any other country in the world on a go-forward basis over the past 3 years. You've got high regulatory capacity. You've got a high concern for human capital, for safety, for natural resources. So I think North America, the U.S. In particular, are well positioned to meet this future demand of low cost, low carbon energy. And so to summarize, people need energy. They deserve it. The world needs more of it, but of all sources. And I think that oil and natural gas are going to be a part of that in a sustainable future by producing low cost, low carbon energy on a go forward basis.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned, I think there is a common perception that ESG introduces attention or is at odds with reliable and affordable hydrocarbon supply. It's worth pointing out also that CO2 emissions in the United States are declining on a trending basis, even though hydrocarbon production is setting records every year. So there is a precedent for reliable and affordable supply and trending improvement in emissions reductions. The challenge is that of the 1 billion that I mentioned earlier, that consume 13 to 14 barrels of crude oil per person per year. CO2 emissions are trending down generally across the board, across those population centers. Energy demand is pretty flat across the same population centers, but the other 7/8 of the world's population, that is not the case. So it certainly is a global challenge, and the United States has done a wonderful job leading the way in the past on a number of these. I think Europe certainly was, I would say, more aggressive in their earlier climate goals, but the United States has shown trending reductions in emissions while continuing to supply the global demand. So I guess the takeaway there for me is that ESG and reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy not at odds from the anecdotal evidence we have so far. It reminds me from the early days, David, of EHS in the industry, when it was kind of seen as a burden, too expensive. People thought they were already pretty good at it until they started measuring and tracking the data. And we were doing work not too long ago with a public upstream company, and they shared that same anecdote. They thought they were good on the safety side until they started measuring, until they started collecting the data and monitoring on a trending basis. And they saw quickly there was a lot of room for improvement, and it didn't cost all that much money, and it saved lives. So let's move on to the second question. As an E&P and sustainability professional, a career E&P professional, what have been the 2 or 3 largest impacts that you've seen ESG have had on oil and gas businesses over the last 3 years?
Yeah, I think you kind of answered this question previously, Jack. Like, as we collect this data, whether it's from a safety perspective, from drilling wells, from fracking wells, as we have more data that's pertinent to our business, we typically, being a group of technical folks and engineers, and scientists, we typically figure out ways to run our business better. And, a lot of emissions are just either fuel that we are burning or, production that we are emitting. And so if we can convert this conversation to how do we reduce emissions to how do we sell 100% of the hydrocarbons we produce, that takes on a different light. And, a lot of the things that we do and the opportunities that are out there are pretty economics, particularly last year when we experienced some higher natural gas prices and maybe in the future. But there are things that we can do today that not only are environmentally positive, but economically positive. And that's why, a lot of times I'll have a conversation of the things we do need to be both economically and environmentally sustainable, because one without the other is not sustainable. I heard somebody say that's the reason the word green has 2 E's, for economic and environment. You can't spell green without it. I think that's a good little anecdote to carry around. So I think emissions data is ultimately going to help us become more efficient and run our businesses better. And in a commoditized business, every bit of margin helps. And so that's certainly something that we should be thinking about. And I think it's gotten us thinking about kind of the value chain more broadly, and concern for the efficiency of our midstream operators and refiners, and who are the consumers downstream. We used to just sell our product at the lease line and custody transfer point and call it good. But I think there's some more conversation and thought being put into the people that are providing the services, certainly their environmental performance, their safety performance, and who is using our products and services. So I think that's been an interesting kind of change over the last few years. And I would just call out, you mentioned safety. I think that there are a lot of parallels here, and I would reference kind of the AXPC, the American Exploration Production Council, kind of the largest 30 or so kind of independent operators here in the U.S. And in one of the conversations, just pleased with Brendan McCracken at Oventive started the conversation. Nick Deloso at Chesapeake hosted the conversation, and it was about how do we improve. We had a really rough year as an industry. It wasn't up to our standards from a safety performance, and we can do better because people matter. We think about ESG as an emissions issue. It's emissions and environmental issue right up until you don't have energy, and then it is immediately a social issue, as we saw in Europe when Russia invaded Ukraine. Safety is one of those social items, and the industry, as you mentioned, Jack, does pretty well, better than a lot of industries, and we can continue to improve that and get better at that every day. And so really proud of the leadership that we have here, particularly in the U.S. upstream business. Mentioned a couple of them. There's many others that are really engaging in meaningful conversation about how do we keep people safe physically, conducting our operations on a daily basis, not just employees, but contractors too. And how can we produce more energy to provide that affordable access to secure energy? Because again, energy is an E issue right up until you don't have it, and then it's a very, very much an S issue.
Yeah, so what you just said reminded me of two things. One is the saying that what gets measured gets managed, and we're not going to get better at it until we have a baseline measurement. And then once we do start measuring it, it's I think our nature as business people to try to figure out how we do better in terms of risk-adjusted return or managing risk otherwise. But it does start with measurement. Chris Romer from Project Canary talks about that we are in the measurement economy. And I think there's a lot to that. I also wanted to reference that what you said reminded me of another instructor in this program, Stephanie Phipps, who is in the business school at the Oklahoma State University. I said that quietly. And she has done long-term research. In fact, she did her PhD on this, showing that those companies that embedded corporate social responsibility, CSR, into their culture, into their workflows, into their business processes and decision-making, that they actually financially outperformed their peers over time. So it became, again, perhaps an unintended consequence that CSR, which now is quite synonymous with ESG, because we are measuring more, because we are observing more and including more in our decision making, it turns us into better decision makers. It turns us into better business people, so that those considerations yield better outcomes, better financial outcomes, certainly better social outcomes. So I'm going to move on to the next conversation or the next question. And this is about what some are calling differentiated molecules, what some are calling certified products. But oil and natural gas, just done in a way, produced in a way that is graded and scored as more sustainable. So I know that Vital went through the process to register some of the product that you sell, perhaps more than that. And my question for you is, Can you give me kind of a few of your framing thoughts that drove your decision to certify the products? Because it's not easy to do, so there's got to be a very good reason to do it, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question for us to think about as an industry. And if we take the view that just a general view that historically, from the beginnings, back in the old days, the industry, right or wrong, has not had the highest public opinion. Level of trust has maybe been low. Again, right or wrong, real or not, that's just kind of the broad perception. And so I think it's important if you we've seen other industries do this, like when there was questions around fair trade, genetically modified, organic, there was a certification process that was put in place to validate and assure that, yeah, this product has met at least a certain standard. And so I think there's some lessons to be learned from some other industries around how do we think about communicating and assuring that, yeah, we actually, regardless of your opinion, there is a fact set that says we are, based on this third party, adjudicated certification, we are meeting a standard that is broadly agreed upon as a reasonable and responsible way to operate. Low emissions, care for human and natural capital, et cetera. And so I think that that's an important thing for us to understand. There's additional benefits, I think, from a data excellence. Again, getting back to measurement and understanding the data and having confidence in that. So I think there's some additional benefits in going through the hard work to obtain those certifications. Just make sure that your data is better and improved. Make sure that you understand gaps in your operation and how to improve those on a risk mitigation basis, or not environmental or other. And I think in the long run, Jack, I think that, my view, and I think other views from other companies, are that, eventually at some point, the certification is kind of going to be the standard, kind of the expectation in the market around, how molecules are sold. And if you're not meeting that standard, kind of like if you've got sour oil or, a lower grade oil, we grade oil on API, gravity, and based on the constituents. So if it's a lower grade oil, you get, the market price less a deduct. And I could see that same kind of analogy holding true for differentiated products as well. Is there's a market price for certified products, and if you're not certified, then there's a deduct associated with it. So maybe there's a premium in the future to, as we think about value chains, but I think it's about understanding your business better, having confidence in the value stream, the consumers of your product, that they have confidence in how you're producing your product. And then if you do those two things right, like the financial component, whether it's margin preservation or potentially a premium, those will take care of themselves and sort themselves out. But having a seat at the table to have products that are assured to be good and valid is important, because there's a lot of production around the world where environmental standards are not followed, where concern for human rights and safety and natural capital and all these other things that we talk about are not followed, or not as high a concern. And so that's really, an underlying, if we think about energy as a global commodity, there will be a preferred order. I mean, we're coming into college football season. I know that's important at the university, and we're 2.5 weeks away from kickoff, and I know a lot of excitement in the air. But there's a top 25 list, and we know who's in and out and what the preferred ranking order is. And so same thing. There's going to be preferred suppliers of energy, and I've got to think, as we continue to think about sustainability topics globally, that a certified barrel, or MCF of gas is going to be, ranked higher in the top 25 rankings, if you will, than maybe some other sources of energy. So, that's kind of how we're thinking about certification, is really as a long-term kind of data quality, data excellence, data governance in preparation for where we think the market's going to be in the future.
So there's additional ongoing data collection once you've actually certified the product to continue to demonstrate that you are still producing product within the constraints of those guidelines. So
Yeah, that's right.
you're collecting more, you're managing and measuring more.
You're collecting the data, you're managing the business, you're hopefully have a plan to mitigate emissions to the extent possible under your operated purview. You're reporting on those emissions not only to the EPA, but it's proposed that we would report those emissions to the SEC. Certainly, a lot of us, Vital included, are voluntarily reporting those things. So, if you're reporting on those things, you'd like for them to be certified. Like for to communicate confidence in those numbers, and that's again one of the reasons we've done that, and we expect to continue to do that going forward.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left, so I'm not going to get to all my questions. That usually happens when I have a conversation with you. So I'm going to go to one that is very pragmatic, very tactical. There are a lot of companies, a lot of young professionals that for the first time are considering a sustainability position or a sustainability report. What advice would you give those people who have some mandate to manage their businesses towards a more sustainable future? How would you help them to embed those principles into their company's culture?
Oh, good gracious. We could talk for hours about this, Jack. I would say maybe a couple of things to keep in mind. One, think big, start small, scale quickly. Okay. So you cannot solve the entire ESG puzzle all at once. So what are your key stakeholders, internal, external need, and what can you take action on today? And that's a great place to start. Okay, so in terms of what to go do, that might be a good starting point. In terms of organizational culture, again, this is a huge topic, but when it comes to ESG, it can be a weaponized word. In fact, just as a side note here, I would look as we think to the future of what's going to happen over the next couple of years. You got elections. You're going to hear a lot about woke, ESG and some other things. So think about ESG as kind of sustainability and stewardship, financial, human, natural resources. How do we steward and and produce these things and take care of these things in a sustainable way? So think about that in terms of your communication, as opposed to using potentially weaponized words like ESG. But when you're talking about sustainability in the organization, there's really 3 paths you can take. One is like you can tell people we need to do this, and that from a cultural impact will last about a second. You can provide, as you talked about, like as we get more data, you can provide a compelling story. You can benchmark and here's the reasons for why we can do this as compared to others. So you can try to compel people through data, and that has a little bit more lasting impact, if you will, but still is not an enduring change. And so when we think about really creating that lasting change, it's about creating that kind of purpose or vision for doing this. Like, what if we were able to produce, economically and environmentally sustainable energy that gave the hope and freedoms and opportunities that we enjoy here in our country to the 7/8 of the world don't have those same access to energy and freedoms that we enjoy. What if we were able to do that and make money and do good at the same time? Like, what if we were able to do that? Would that be an effort worth engaging in? And if so, here's kind of a roadmap on how we could do those things, starting small, scaling over time with concrete steps that use compelling evidence. So that transformational kind of vision, transactional steps on how to get there over time. I think that's a more compelling and enduring and lasting way to kind of think about organizational change in kind of introducing or embedding sustainability into your culture.
Wonderful answer. Thank you. Wonderful answer to a big question. By the way, for those listening who want to pursue the path that David just described, that is the essence of what we examine, what we teach, what we put into practice through the Energy ESG Leadership Certificate Program. Again, for more information about that, there's a QR code on the upper right side of your screen. Click it. Reach out to me if you have any questions. You can find my contact information at the web address in the lower middle of your screen. David, I sincerely appreciate your time, your thoughts, your expertise, and your support. You've been a wonderful instructor, colleague, and friend over many years now. And I know that your efforts are making your company a better place, but you're making the world a better place, and I'm grateful for it.
Oh, grateful for the opportunity, Jack. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for the opportunity to continue to engage with the center. You're building a great program and great culture of excellence down at OU, and look forward to seeing you and in the next cohort here in later this fall.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.